In February 1998, the cold weather enveloped the city. At that time, I was studying philosophy as a major. The subject was fascinating and challenging for a young man who was an avid thinker. I used to spend a lot of time debating with Christians about their faith. My Christian friends and I shared insights with each other. At the time, I was renting an apartment with a classmate. One night, we got into a heated argument. We often had conflicts over various issues due to our different living habits. These accumulated grievances finally exploded that night. I decided to leave the place temporarily. Another classmate of mine lived in a nearby apartment, and I decided to look for him. When I arrived at his apartment, I found him with his friends. They were listening to music, talking and drinking. I joined their party. The setting allowed me to relax and relieve stress for a while. As the alcohol seeped in, my thoughts gradually became clouded and my judgment began to suffer. I didn't realize I had had many drinks. After a while, I wanted to go downstairs to use the bathroom. As I tried to walk down the stairs, my legs became weak. I tried my best to keep my balance, but the effects of alcohol made me lose control and I fell down at once. The moment I fell, I felt like the whole world was spinning. My body hit each flight of stairs and severe pain spread throughout my body. Finally, I hit my head on the wall. When I regained consciousness, I had appeared in the hospital. I remember that many people were gathered around my bed. I could see the worry on their faces. After the doctor saw my injuries, the doctor decided to perform further tests and scans on my head. The paramedics wheeled me into a room. I felt physical discomfort and tension. The scanner made a low sound and rotated around my head. After a while, I felt like I was entering a completely different realm. A strange sensation permeated around my body, as if I was floating upward. I left my body. The medical staff was still busy at work. I no longer felt pain or discomfort. Instead, I felt a sense of peace. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying on a bed. There was nothing else in the room but the bed. The room was very bright, but I could not see the light source. Just then, I saw a door. It looked different from the surrounding rooms and gave off a special glow. Curiosity drove me toward the door, and I reached out my hand and gently pushed the door open. Suddenly, I felt an inexplicable suction, as if there was an invisible force pulling me outward. For a moment, I lost my balance. I finally landed on a piece of grass. The grass looked extraordinarily vibrant under the sunlight. The wind around me blew gently, giving me a touch of freshness. This place felt very strange to me. There were no buildings or streets. Only endless grass and blue sky. I began to explore the grass. My feet felt like I was one with nature as I stepped on the soft grass. After I walked over a small hill, a group of people appeared in front of me. They were gathered together, wearing black clothing. My footsteps paused for a moment, and I felt an unusual sense of tension and fear. As I approached them, I saw my father and mother. Their eyes were red and swollen, and my mother was crying uncontrollably. To my dismay, I realized that the scene before me was my funeral. The coffin was covered with white flowers. There was also a headstone with my name and birthday in the cemetery, which made me feel incredible. This discovery threw me into confusion and despair. I didn't know what had happened. My emotions became very confused. I approached my father and mother and tried to communicate with them. However, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I called out and touched, they seemed unable to perceive my presence. They continued to cry. To them, I had left this world. I wanted to tell them that I was alive, I wanted to hug them and comfort them. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break this invisible barrier. The people around me gradually dispersed and left the cemetery, leaving only me and the silence. I stared at my tombstone, the handwriting clearly engraved on it, which was my former name and birthday. The scene touched my heart deeply. I tried to touch my own body, but my hand went right through it. It was as if I had become an invisible being. Suddenly, a powerful force pulled me back to the hospital. I saw myself lying on a bed, wrapped in white bedding. My face was very pale. Doctors and nurses were busily moving through the corridors. After a while, the doctors left the room one by one. I heard one of the doctors whisper to another doctor that we had lost him. The words plunged me into endless sadness and despair. Only one doctor remained by my bedside, and he stood there silently, his eyes revealing a deep frustration. I could feel the struggle and confusion inside him. I tried to get close to him and tell him that I was fine now. However, I was beyond the boundaries of reality and I could not interact with him in any way. Finally, this doctor also left the room. It was at this point that my soul once again moved upward uncontrollably. When I passed through the hospital ceiling, I came to a mysterious place. A bright light pervaded the surroundings, and everything was filled with peace and tranquility. This place seemed to be a boundless universe, filled with endless energy. A powerful energy was injected into my soul. My existence transcended the bonds of matter and was no longer limited by time and space. I felt light and free. I looked at my arms curiously, and I noticed that they had not lost their original form, but the substance that made them up was different. They were made up of a pure and bright white air mass that emitted a warm and serene glow. This substance seemed to be a pure energy. I felt that I was no longer an independent individual, but interconnected with the entire universe. The boundary between me and the universe became blurred, and I could feel other souls. Suddenly, a light more dazzling than mine came close to me. This light was as bright as the sun. And I could not see the scene around me. A gentle but firm male voice came into my ears, his voice was full of authority and wisdom. The man told me that I couldn't go on because someone had made a mistake that had caused me to be sent to this place by mistake. He explained that I had to return to Earth and complete my mission there before I could continue my journey. The man's voice was full of care and guidance, and his words contained endless wisdom. He explained to me the purpose and responsibility of my existence and reminded me of the mission that still needed to be accomplished on Earth. After this man's voice faded, I felt a force that was pulling me back to Earth, back to the reality I knew so well. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying in a dark and cold room. The surrounding area was filled with an eerie aura, and the dim lights cast eerie shadows. This sight was in stark contrast to the bright world I had experienced before, which made me feel very depressed. The air around me was filled with a strange putrid smell. I noticed some cold metal instruments and old medical equipment in the room. I was more than sure I was in a morgue. I tried to stand up, but I could barely move. My heart was racing and sweat was dripping from my forehead. I realized that I had to get out of this horrible place as soon as possible. In the corner of the morgue, I noticed a broken trash can on the floor. With all my strength, I banged the trash can on the table. I hoped that someone outside would hear it. I hoped that my actions would attract the attention of the hospital staff and help me escape this horrible situation. Suddenly, there were footsteps outside the door and I knew my efforts had not been in vain. A paramedic entered the morgue with a look of panic and confusion on his face. When I woke up again, it was 4 days later. I felt shocked and confused. I didn't know what had happened in that time, why I had lost consciousness, and how I had reawakened. I found myself in a comfortable hospital bed, surrounded by clean white sheets and soft pillows. The room was bright and tidy, in contrast to the previous morgue. The sunlight illuminated the entire room, making me feel very warm. I lay quietly on the bed and thought back to my previous experience. As I was deep in thought, a doctor came into the room. The doctor explained to me that I had suffered a serious head injury. I was taken to the hospital for emergency treatment. I was in a coma during which my heart had stopped beating. He told me that I was a medical miracle. He said I was an incredible survivor. It was at this time that my mother walked into the room. Her eyes were filled with worry, and the moment she saw me wake up, her face burst into a happy smile. She went to the bedside and gently held my hand, her eyes filled with tears. She said in a trembling voice, "Son, you're finally awake. I have been praying for you." She gently stroked my hair, as if to remove all the uneasiness I felt inside. When I got home, I sat next to my mother and told her everything I had experienced in the hospital. My mother listened quietly to every word I said, her face filled with amazement. She grabbed my hand tightly and her eyes revealed a deep awe. My mother said, "Son, what an incredible thing you have gone through. I cannot imagine how lost and alone my world would be if I lost you. I believe that God saw how strong and brave you were, and He was not willing to let you go. He sent you back to me at a critical time, a true miracle." She hugged me tightly and tears flowed down her face. My mother thanked God with all her heart. She was convinced that only God could save me at the moment my heart stopped beating. I listened quietly to my mother's words and felt the faith and determination deep in her heart. Although I did not have the same strong faith as my mother, I understood the love and care she expressed. I am grateful that God sent me back to my mother so that we could continue to live together. Since then, I have passed on my faith and love to those around me. I believe God's guidance will lead me through every stage of my life. This experience has made us more aware of the fragility and preciousness of life and inspired me to cherish and treat each other more kindly.